Hello and good afternoon to Austria. Hello and good morning to Canada. My name is Gregor Postel. I'm the Trade Commissioner of the Austrian General Consulate Commercial Section. Schönen guten Nachmittag nach Österreich. Guten Morgen nach Kanada. Mein Name ist Gregor Postel. Ich bin der österreichische Wirtschaftsdelegierte in Toronto und darf Sie herzlich begrüßen zu unserem Webinar. Diesmal zum Titel Go Canada, Bringing Austrian Food and Beverage Products to Canada. Ich werde jetzt kurz eine Einleitung machen und dann später überleiten zu unseren Experten, der dann seine Präsentation in Englisch halten wird. Doch zunächst einmal ganz am Anfang ein paar Housekeeping Rules. Das Webinar wird aufgezeichnet. Sie halten dann in ein paar Tagen die geschnittene Version dann auf YouTube-Channel. Das heißt, wir schicken eine E-Mail zu, wo Sie den Link dann finden. Jetzt, während der Präsentation, haben wir Ihre Kamera und Ihr Mikrofon ausgeschaltet gelassen. Wenn Sie Fragen haben, die schon während der Präsentation bei Ihnen anfallen, dann bitte in die Chat-Version hineinschreiben. Wir werden dann zum Schluss bei der Question and Answer Session auf Ihre Fragen eingehen. Sollte zu wenig Zeit sein, dann werden wir gerne im Nachhinein die Fragen dann schriftlich beantworten. Ja? Und auch wenn Sie technische Probleme haben, bitte auch in den Chat hineinschreiben. Oder wenn Fragen erst nach dem Webinar auftauchen, dann bitte gerne an uns an toronto@wko.at senden. Ja, ich werde jetzt bei der Einleitung einen kurzen Marktüberblick geben. Dann wird unser Experte Andrew Warschat über Front of Package Leveling, Markteintritt und Compliance sprechen. Und wie schon erwähnt, zum Schluss gibt es die Question and Answer Session. Wie sieht es aus mit den Lebensmittelexporten von Österreich nach Kanada? Das Top-Jahr hatten wir im Jahr 2022. 2020, 2021 war ein bisschen verhalten, auch aufgrund Corona und Covid. Es hat sich dann 2023 ein bisschen eingependelt, ist wieder gestiegen 2024. Sie werden sich jetzt fragen, warum 2025 hier der Balken nicht so hoch ausschlägt. Das ist damit begründet, einige werden sich erinnern können, es gab Ausbruch der Maul- und Klauenseuche Ende Februar, Anfang März an der ungarischen, österreichischen, slowakischen, österreichischen Grenze. Die kanadischen Behörden waren daher sehr übervorsichtig und haben auch Österreich auf die Liste gesetzt mit Maul- und Klauenseuche, und das hat circa ein halbes Jahr gedauert, bis man die kanadischen Behörden überzeugen hat können, dass Österreich nicht betroffen ist, kein einziger Fall in Österreich bemerkt worden ist und dass es nur eben knapp über der Grenze war in Ungarn und Slowakei. Das hat ein bisschen sozusagen den Export eingedämmt, aber wir sehen schon im 4. Quartal, dass die Exportzahlen wieder nach Kanada steigen. Und wie Sie sehen, ist noch viel Potenzial da. Ich möchte auch die Gelegenheit nutzen, auf zwei wichtige Veranstaltungen hinzuweisen. Das eine ist der Marktplatz Österreich für Nahrungsmittel und Getränke. Heuer zum 20. Mal. Wer ist dort? Es kommen Einkäufer aus Kanada, aber auch aus vielen anderen Ländern und Kontinenten. Sie als österreichische Firma können hier ausstellen und haben hier die beste Möglichkeit, in Kontakt zu treten mit Einkäuferinnen und Einkäufern aus aller Welt. Kanada-spezifisch wollen wir jetzt schon darauf hinweisen, die Lebensmittelmesse SIAL 2027, nächstes Jahr Ende April, Anfang Mai in Toronto, wo wir wieder den Gruppenstand planen, und wir hoffen, dass wir nächstes Jahr so ein Gruppenfoto mit Ihnen machen können in Toronto. Kurz noch ein kurzer Abriss zu einem Fahrplan für einen erfolgreichen Markteintritt. Wir stehen Ihnen immer zur Verfügung für persönliche Beratung, sei es, wenn Sie ganz am Anfang stehen oder schon erste Schritte unternommen haben am kanadischen Markt. Uns einfach kontaktieren. Das Beste ist ein virtuelles Gespräch mit uns führen über MS Teams. Da können wir rasch einige gewisse Punkte klären. Wie immer, Wissen ist Macht. Das ist nicht die erste Webinar zu diesem Thema. Wir hatten 2024 eine ganze Webinarserie zu dem Thema Nahrungsmittel und Getränke. Und wir werden Ihnen, wenn wir Ihnen die Aufzeichnung schicken zu diesem Webinar, auch die Links zu den früheren Webinaren schicken. Da sind wertvolle Informationen für Sie drinnen. Wie schon in der Folgenfolie erwähnt, CI 2027 eine gute Gelegenheit, verstärkt auf Ihre Produkte im kanadischen Markt aufmerksam zu machen. Die Messe ist natürlich ein idealer Standort, neue Kontakte zu knüpfen, bestehende Kontakte zu pflegen, Einkäufer zu treffen, Importeure, Agenten. Und last but not least, ein Schritt in einen neuen Markt ist immer mit Kosten verbunden. Da möchte ich darauf hinweisen, auf die International-Initiative, eine gemeinsame Aktion von der Wirtschaftskammer Österreich und vom Bundesministerium für Wirtschaft, Energie und Tourismus. Da können Sie gewisse Kosten einreichen, die dann gefördert werden. Und da hoffen wir, es erleichtert Ihren Markteintritt nach Kanada. Und Ihre Entscheidung ist dann vielleicht früher gefallen, in diesen Markt einzutreten. Ja, und bin ich schon fertig mit meinem Teil. Now I have to honor to hand over to our expert, Andrew Barshard from Quality Smart Solution, who will start now his presentation, and please enjoy the rest of the presentation and see and hear you at the question answer session. Andrew, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much, Gregor, and welcome to this presentation around food compliance and market entry into Canada. So just a little bit about Quality Smart Solutions and myself. I'm the CEO and founder of QSS. We were founded in 2007, and we primarily focus on FDA and Health Canada compliance, but we've begun actually offering solutions in a few other countries as we kind of continue our global regulatory strategy. We've served over 3,500 clients in our 19-year history now, and we cover various categories, including foods, natural health products, or dietary supplements, or food supplements as they're called in Europe. Also ingredients, cosmetics, medical devices, and OTC drugs. And we have another division called Quality Import Solutions, and that's our sister company that holds a Health Canada license for importing foods and natural health products. We act as a responsible agent, a quality assurance responsible agent under Quality Import Solutions. So again, just a quick recap, founded in 2007. Again, FDA and Health Canada expertise and various service areas, over 15 different service areas. And we have experts, some from industry, some who are former government officials, a well-rounded team of expertise. So today what we'll be covering is focusing on food regulations. So we'll start off talking about the food labeling requirements, followed by what the importation and regulatory requirements around that is, and then some practical market entry steps, on a commercial standpoint, and things to think about and consider and be aware of, and obviously avoid getting into issues when you plan to launch into Canada. And then we'll wrap it up with some question and answers and open up the floor to you. All right, so the So Canada's label framework is governed by the Canada Food Inspection Agency and Health Canada. Health Canada sets the policies and standards. CFIA enforces it. And in fact, CFIA actually has more power than Health Canada when it comes to enforcement. So they can issue recalls regardless of Health Canada's decision. So, and this is of course all about safe food for Canadians is ultimately the premise behind this. The core legislation around foods in Canada is the Food and Drug Act, and on the marketing standpoint is the Consumer Packaging and Labeling Act. Of course, labels must be truthful, they must not be misleading, and they must be fully bilingual, both English and French. Those are both the official languages in Canada. Canadian requirements are not interchangeable with Europe or US labels, so you must adhere to Canada's regulations. It's a separate country from the US. As much as you may have heard some things in the news, Canada is still and will remain an independent country, and so we have our own regulations around that. So on every package, every food package, there are requirements, just like in Europe. So the common things that are required are common name of the product, the net quantity, so that volume, whether it's a liquid or weight, the ingredient list that has to be in descending order by weight, allergen declaration, nutrition facts table, which lays out all the nutritional data, vitamins, minerals, daily value, etc. The name and address of the responsible party. So, for example, it could be imported by whoever, and then the expiration date, the durable life date, if that is applicable. And what we see often is that there's a lot of missing or incorrectly formatted elements. And that could be font size, that could be, these things I just listed. One or more of these often are either not in the proper format or they're completely missed. So I'll address that a little bit later. So as I mentioned, Canada has two official languages, French and English, and all mandatory information must be in both languages. Now this applies to everything from your ingredient list, your nutrition facts table, your allergen statements, and your product identity. Recently, and this came out last year, in Quebec, there was a rule. Quebec is predominantly a French-speaking province in Canada, and there was a bill called Bill 96 that was passed. And basically what that bill states is that French must be equally prominent, not smaller or secondary to English. So your font size for French must be the same size as English. You can't decrease that. And there is enforcement with that if you don't follow it. There's a what you call, I guess you could say, the French language police, and they're called the OQLF. And they take this very seriously. It could be complaints from customers to them just doing random checks, throughout different retailers. So really important to adhere to both languages before you ship to Canada. So and often this does require a full package redesign because now you're fitting two languages. Now I know in Europe, you guys are probably used to this because I know there's multiple languages as part of the EU. So, hopefully this won't be too much of a challenge for you when you're just having to put two languages instead of 5 or 6 or 7. So, this is definitely the biggest redesign driver is bilingual language. And keep in mind that partial translations don't meet the standard or the regulations. You must be both in English and French. Now, the nutrition facts table, it has a specific layout and it has a format, and that's actually governed by the Compendium of Nutrition Facts table. So there's a guidance document that is dependent on the size of your packaging, the formatting. You could have a bottle, you could have a a bag, or maybe a sachet. And so those all have different formats of your nutrition facts table and the layout of that. And that's what's laid out in terms of the Canadian font size rules, the calculation as well, the daily value. And compared to the EU, there are different nutrient orders. So this table kind of summarizes those differences between Canada and the EU. Let's go on to the next slide. So ingredient lists and allergen labels. So as I mentioned earlier, all ingredients listed must be in descending order by weight. And a big area, and this is a big area for enforcement, and this is where many recalls happen. And these are serious recalls where it's a stop sale, a public announcement, if an allergen is missing. Sometimes, often what happens is what's missed is little things like milk. Sometimes it's an ingredient that may have been sourced from milk, and the brand completely forgot that, and it's in the raw material C of A, and milk isn't there, and suddenly that triggers a recall. So really important that, and these are all the ones that are currently there. From time to time, they do revise these. For example, sesame is relatively newer, and this, Canada often speaks with the United States as well to see what allergens they have and what they revise, and Canada tries to stay in step with the US in terms of allergens, so they're basically in line. And these are big things: missing allergens, or incorrect terminology, or maybe the specification compared to the label is mismatching, and this applies to ingredients. Claims and marketing statements. So all claims must be substantiated, and they must meet the Canadian threshold. So when you create a nutrition facts table, you have, say, 25 grams of protein. This is where, statements like high in protein could be potentially used. Similarly with source of fiber. These are all, obviously protein is a very, very hot area right now, as is fiber for, weight management or just overall general health. And so there are thresholds which you must adhere to, like based on the nutrition facts table. That's the driver of these nutrient claims. One thing that you also have to keep in mind is that you just can't copy from the EU packaging, whether it's your nutrition facts table or whether it's claims that you've made on your EU packaging. It may not actually work in Canada because, again, these are different rules based on that nutrition facts table. And the claims are, they are not marketing language. They are regulated language, right? So when you see high in protein, that is not a marketing claim. It is actually a regulated claim. So, and if you do other callouts, like, even the language of your product name, like you may have a product called protein, like super protein granola bar. That is, like, for you to say that, you have to be really careful because, again, it has to align with the nutrition facts table. So keep that in mind. Now, this is a newer regulation that came into effect, relatively new here, just in January of this year. It was phased in over the last few years, and finally enforcement began January 1st. So these cover 3 areas, which is sodium, sugars, and saturated fat. Obviously, Canada, just like in Europe and other countries, the foods that are, being sold at retail, there are more and more variety of types of foods being sold. And there's also foods that may be considered maybe quote unquote unhealthy, Canada is looking out for consumers. We do have a public health care system in Canada, and so this kind of is all connected in a sense. If you think about it, Canadian taxpayers pay for that healthcare system, similar to many countries in Europe. And so this is an action that Health Canada is taking to ensure that consumers are aware when they're buying products. If they don't know how to interpret a nutrition facts table, this front of package labeling is, as you know, assists them in making those informed decisions. So it is controlled, it is standardized. It's a black and white symbol, and there is no customization that is allowed. So you must adhere to those dimensions, that rectangular shape. It'll obviously vary in size based on the packaging. It must appear on the principal display panel, so that's the front of the packaging, and it must be clearly visible, and you'll see that magnifying glass. This actually went through a lot of iterations. I was actually a stakeholder in the Health Canada development of this symbol, and it went through a lot of different variations. In fact, Mexico has something very, very similar as well. Obviously, it's not the same layout, but clearly, you know, countries are doing this. Actually, in fact, the United States, the FDA has proposed it. Probably won't come into effect for, you know, a couple of years still, but clearly, you know, this part of, you know, sugar, sodium, and saturated fat is a very important issue when it comes to nutritional values for foods. Now, the assessment is based on the larger of the declared serving size or reference amount. So you can't design around this, right? So really, your serving size is going to dictate, you know, this symbol. So here's some thresholds to consider. Prepackaged foods, the threshold is greater than or equal to 15% of the daily value. And the daily value is a calculation that's done, you know, based on those nutrients, those macronutrients. And that, you know, greater than or equal to 15% daily value for prepackaged foods. For prepackaged meals, the daily value is greater than or equal to 30% when that's triggered. Now, there are certain exemptions. Obviously, things like, you know, sugar or spices or maple syrup or butter or honey. Those have natural, you know, those have sugar, for example, that is naturally found in there. Obviously, table salt is 100% sodium, so there's no need to put a sodium symbol. Or olive oil. You don't need to state that it is, you know, pretty much all fat. So that's an exemption. Fresh fruits and vegetables is another category that's exempt. Raw meats and very small packaging. Some of the things that people are trying to play around with is they're misclassifying a product as a meal so that they can get to a higher threshold, right? So they may teeter on that, oh, they have to put that symbol, and they're like, oh, let's just call it a meal. And CFIA is very well aware of this kind of quote unquote game that companies may try to play. And so they are very much enforcing this and policing this. So again, you have to make sure you adhere to these daily values for that front of package labeling. So, you know, common labeling pitfalls, and this is just, you know, these are the most common ones that we see. Missing French or partial translation. So maybe they translate the front of the packaging, they don't do the back. Sometimes what we see is companies actually, they want to keep their packaging because maybe it's shrink sleeved or the actual printing is done on the bottle, and it's very expensive to do maybe a separate run. And so what they do is they'll put a sticker, and sometimes we've seen a sticker just over the nutrition facts table, not the rest of the label. So it's not compliant. And so that puts you at risk, particularly in Quebec. And, you know, when you're launching in Canada, you have to think about the entire country, not just, you know, 9 out of the 10 provinces. Quebec accounts for approximately 1/4 of Canada's population. About 10 to 11 million people live in Quebec. So it's a significant part of, you know, your commercial strategy and your sales strategy in Canada. So you can't ignore it, and you can't ignore the French translation. Another pitfall that we see is incorrect nutrition facts table format, or it's a non-Canadian nutrition facts table. There's sometimes, allergen gaps or inconsistencies. That's a very huge issue, as I mentioned, in terms of a risk. It's a big risk, and it can trigger stop sale, and well, it goes beyond stop sale. It's actually a recall, the highest level of recall that Canada issues. Another one is that claims are not validated against the Canadian threshold. So, you might say, high in fiber, and you only have, 0.5 grams of fiber, and it doesn't hit the threshold. The FOP, the front of packaging symbol, is missing when required. Again, this is a new regulation. There's more and more enforcement that's happening for FOP, so be aware of that. And then another piece is, of course, all of it, like the label, the specification in terms of your raw material specifications and the C of A, are not all aligned. Often a nutrition facts table is created from ingredients, and but it's always wise to have testing done at a third party to confirm that nutritional profile, particularly the macronutrients, the fats, carbs, and proteins on your label. And keep in mind, another thing that we see a lot, especially with protein, is companies add collagen to bump up the protein, but collagen is an incomplete protein. It cannot be counted as protein. So be aware of that. Collagen is not counted as protein. Labeling is the number one reason products are delayed or rejected as an import, and that could be rejected right at the border. The Canada Border Service Agency, CBSA, polices this, along with CFIA, who works hand in hand with the Canada Border Service Agency. So they are checking randomly. They're checking it actually more frequently because of the trade kind of disruptions that's been happening in the last year. So really important that your label is fully compliant. So another important piece to to sell your product in Canada is the Safe Food for Canadian regulations, which came into effect several years ago in 2019. And so it governs all foods imported into Canada. So prior to 2019, there wasn't this licensing program. Basically, the enforcement was done by CFIA. They would basically be checking manufacturers, mostly auditing them quite frequently. It was very resource intense. So that department was very, very big and just a lot of work, pretty expensive, thinking about taxpayers paying for all of this. And so CFIA and Health Canada came up with this program whereby they're putting the onus based on a license. And the licensing there's different licenses that are available. There's importing, so a company in Canada or the United States. The United States is a non-resident importer. Those two countries can have an import license. And then there's also manufacturing, packaging, labeling, and exporting. Those are all the different license activities that are available. And so the important piece of this is that it covers food safety. It's really about traceability of the origin of where the product was manufactured, and even going one step back from that manufacturer to raw materials and following it through all the way to the importer, who's responsible for gathering all that data, making sure that manufacturer has a food safety plan in place. Canada uses a preventative system-based approach. So it's not just border inspection, it is all the way through with this license. And so it's really important that all these controls and traceability records are all documented, all the way from the manufacturer through to that license holder in Canada. So who's responsible on the importing licensing side? So in terms of the exporter, so that's you guys out there, you have to supply accurate product and obviously it has to be in specification for your testing, your macronutrients, your water activity, microbial testing, etc. Obviously the labels, like we talked about, labels must be fully compliant. And you have to flag any kind of formulation changes. So if your formula changes, your label is also going to likely change. Your nutrient profile may change because of that. Your other ingredients, that's the non-active ingredients, those will likely have to change. So unless you're, substituting maybe a different salt source or something like that, right? I mean, if it's the same ingredient, but you're just sourcing it differently, your ingredient will probably stay the same. It's still a good idea to actually validate the nutrition facts table when you do any kind of ingredients. That of course should be any part of any change control process with a manufacturer or exporter. And you as exporter remain fully commercially accountable. The importer is the one that holds the Safe Food for Canadian Regulations license. So that's that Canadian company. Like, for example, our company, Quality Import Solutions, holds an SFCR license. And they're legally responsible really for the compliance. They're a responsible agent, which is a term often used in Europe for importing. And like I said, it can be a Canadian company, or it can be a non-resident importer. And so I want to clarify this, like I mentioned just a few minutes ago, that the non-resident importer, the only country that is eligible to be an NRI for this SFCR license is the United States. Only the U.S. And that's a treaty, that's an agreement between the two countries where the United States created their own program, Canada created the SFCR, and they wanted to harmonize it to be, to basically have safe foods entering both countries, North America wide. And so the food safety accountability is owned by the importer. So they take a lot of liability and accountability in this. The CFIA is that governing body that sets and enforces the regulations. They take a risk-based inspection approach. Obviously, foods that have higher water activity, obviously, fresh vegetables and meats require actually a separate permit. They are almost always getting audited and inspected when they're coming into Canada, and that permit is being checked as well. So highest risk products are fresh meats and seafood. CFIA has the full power to refuse, to hold, or destroy shipments, whether it's at the border, whether it enters Canada and it's already being sold. They have that full jurisdiction to do that. And they actually conduct recalls. They will work, for example, with an importer. If there's a recall, they will coordinate. The importer will gather distribution records, working with that exporter and that manufacturer, and they will gather that information and then present that to CFIA, and help coordinate that recall. So that's another important role of the importer. So what the importer is expecting from you as a brand is that your manufacturing site needs to have a food safety plan, and that's a preventative control plan similar to HACCP. And that's really the responsibility of the importer. Like us as an importer, we have a preventive control plan, right? It's not as stringent as a HACCP plan, but it is following a food safety plan. It's basically outlining what CFIA has outlined online, which is the FSAP, which is the Food Safety Enhancement Program, and that's a public documentation that you can review. And so the importer, like what we do is before we start that service of acting as that import agent, we will actually review the HACCP plan of that manufacturer. If they have GFSI certification, that's great. And GFSI certification, for those of you who aren't familiar with that, there are different schemes worldwide. The most common ones that you hear about are SQF, BRC, FSSC. There's ISO programs as well. So if you have those are good programs to have. And I can tell you on a commercial standpoint, some of the bigger retailers in Canada, so like a Walmart or Costco's or Sobeys or Loblaws or Metro, those are the biggest retailers in Canada. They are typically asking for GFSI certification. They may allow for an interim program where you can get another similar certification, and maybe it's not the full GFSI program, but it's really a good investment to have when you're entering not just Canada, but even just globally. And it's really just it's really monitoring the HACCP plan a manufacturer has. Other things that that are important that you must have, obviously, is allergen and sanitation control documentation. Product testing is going to be happening, like we review lot by lot when products come into the country. So that testing and validation of that data is really crucial. You got to make sure that you have a traceability system there in place. So, the lot code is linked to the production and the distribution records. And of course, part of your documentation should include what lots of your raw material were used in that finished product lot, right? So all traceability, because if there's ever a quality complaint that happens, and we get that, for example, as an importer, or if you use any other importer, that company, that importer is responsible to do an investigation. And that investigation will go back to, okay, manufacturer, who were the materials that you, or like, have you investigated the raw material suppliers, and trace back to what lot that was, and report back to us. And that, if there's a recall, those are the kind of things that CFIA may come back and actually do almost like a forensic audit and really go into that deep dive inspection. So make sure you have all that as a manufacturer, and you should if you're following a HACCP plan. The other part that you should expect from that importer is that there's going to be a rapid recall, right? Especially if it's a higher risk recall, that recall is going to happen very, very quickly, like within 1 or 2 days. Like it's got to be quick. So you got to make sure you have all that documentation ready on the pulse when or if that ever happens. Hopefully it's an if. It never is a when. Importers increasingly request this documentation up front before onboarding. We do this all before we onboard any clients. And really, we're really stringent about this. This documentation has to be in place before we start, or any importer should be having that in place. So, this is kind of just an illustration of that. So, your supplier, that's one step back of that documentation. Then there's your product, and then there's a responsibility one step forward of the Canadian importer. And you must provide, lot codes tied to the production records. Ingredient traceability documentation, like I mentioned there, is really crucial, and all that shipping documentation and COAs where applicable. What's really a good idea too that helps prevent delays at the border is, stating who the Canadian SFCR import agent is on your bill of lading, on your documentation. That will save time. Now, in Canada, there's a new program started called CARM, C-A-R-M. That is an online platform that CFIA, Health Canada, the Border Agency have worked on together, and this is where the documentation is fed into. There was a transition period that's now over, and that's really heavily enforced, and that's where all the documentation has to be uploaded into. And there are almost like bots or AI or whatnot that are actually screening it when it gets uploaded. And if it's missing, there's stuff missing, it'll actually notify you, or notify the broker that you're working with. So it's really important that all those documents, you have those in hand, and you upload those into that online portal called CARM. The most common gap are lot codes on packaging that don't match with the internal records. That becomes a major issue with during inspections or recalls. And in fact, if the inspection finds that issue, that will often trigger a recall. So it's not just a customer complaint or just something that happened. It could actually be triggered by an inspection. Customs clearance and border process. So as I mentioned here, the importer broker submits product declaration and documentation package to the CBSA, which is the Canada Border Service Agency, and then CFIA, could inspect it. They could sample it. They could even test it. They have done this, and they are kind of the first gatekeeper. And then, of course, they may be in communication with that importer as well. It's a risk-based system, so not every product, there's just not enough staff there to review every single product that's coming through the doors, right? So you can imagine that the most highest risk are, like I mentioned, dairy, meat, products that have high allergens often, right? Like or honey is a high risk because of antibiotics that have been used internationally in certain countries. And so Health Canada and CFIA really monitor honey. In fact, like we act as an importer of various Manuka honey brands that come out of New Zealand, and we've been audited quite frequently because of that. So so that's just something to keep in mind is, you know, high risk. It's going to be scrutinized, and that could result in holdups at the border. So if you have a higher risk product, build that into your timeline, right? And we can guide you through that. We can advise you, hey, this is going to be a higher risk. Be aware of that. You know, make sure you get all the documentation sent over, label compliance, all those things, but build that time because there may be a stop at the border for further inspection. If the product's not compliant, the product's going to be refused. It's going to be destroyed potentially, often, or returned at your cost, right? So it's detained, and then the CBSA will hold it and say, okay, hey, we're charging you every single day that it's sitting in that warehouse, and eventually, you know, if the product's not compliant, you're gonna have to make a decision. Okay, we'll either get it destroyed on site or ship it back, you know, country of origin, and that then you got to figure out what's going to be cheaper to do. Sometimes what we've seen in some cases where the overstickering can be done in a very controlled manner while it's being detained, but I wouldn't be banking on that as kind of your option 3. So keep that in mind. Issues are typically identified at the border, and that's when it's really, you know, too late to fix for the vast majority of the time. So and pre-shipment review is not negotiable. So again, you know, you're going to be working often with an importer, like a company like ours, like that responsible agent who holds the SFCR license and owns the compliance responsibility, and they are your primary compliance partner. Then there's a broker, and that's a customs broker. They'll clear the paperwork, any duties that may be applicable. The good thing with Europe, Canada has what's called the CETA. That's this free trade agreement with the European Union, with the EU. So and Canada has that agreement with 45 other countries worldwide. So so that's, you know, obviously the customs agent will verify that with you. There's tariff codes as well that have to be all aligned based on the type of food that you have. These are all these paperwork is by that broker gets submitted declarations to the CBSA, and the broker does not own any of that compliance. It's that SFCR importer who holds that license. And then your role as the exporter, you're the brand owner. Provide those documentations early, confirm that the label compliance, that the label is fully compliant before you go to print. Get it checked. You know, that's typically what we do is, you know, review the labels and then flag any, you know, changes, you know, like your formula changes or your supplier changes or packaging. Like make sure you let that importer, that consultant know upstream so that there's no surprises downstream. So the 5 steps to Canadian market entry. Number 1, product and regulatory assessment. So classifying that product, review the ingredients and additives and claims, and that front of packaging risk that's come into effect enforcement January 1st of this year. You know, your label development and review is the next stage. So, you know, you'll have a new bilingual label when you launch in Canada, right? You'll have a Canadian nutrition facts table, the allergens that we listed earlier. There's other mandatory elements like the, you know, the weight in the front of the packaging that you have to, the net weight, and the nutrition facts structure and whatnot, right? So that's all mandatory elements. And then documentation ready, like when you're shipping to Canada, like your label artwork, your spec, your certificate of analysis, your allergen statements, your packaging specs, all that, have that package ready before you ship to Canada. Make sure you selected your import partner well in advance. It's a really good idea to do that. And of course, then comes launch time, and the importer is fully onboarding you. All those logistics are set up. You have a customs broker, and got to make sure border clearance. There's no surprises at the border. So step 2 here, label development and review is really important here. As I've mentioned and I've reinforced all along, bilingual labeling is mandatory. It's not optional. And it must include that Canadian nutrition facts table, the ingredient list in the Canadian format, the allergen declarations, like I mentioned, net quantity, common name. Keep in mind that you can't do a direct translation of the EU label to be a Canadian label. That is not going to be compliant. It is going to be very, very different from the EU. And work with your Canadian consultant like Quality Smart Solutions and your importer like Quality Import Solutions before you go to print. We plan this all out for you well in advance. So, and treat Canadian labeling as a new label. It's not an adoption of your European label. And there's going to be a full design. And we also help with the design. If you have struggles with that, don't worry about it. We have, a graphic designer. We have a French translator. We take care of all that for you. Sometimes what companies often do is they'll have, they have like 50 labels. They have a big launch going into Canada, but 50 labels is going to be, maybe not in budget for us to handle all of them. So they'll have us do maybe the first 1 or 2 labels, and then their designer will know how to do it. We'll do the translation, we'll provide that all, and then and they take care of the rest with their graphic designer. Could always double check it afterwards, but that's a strategy to take as well. And we're there to assist you along the whole journey. Your documentation readiness, like I said, final label artwork, product specifications, your testing, allergen statement, your packaging specs, that whole document, really important, and have that ready well in advance. So let's talk about some timelines here. The product and label assessment, it takes us about, it could take 2 weeks, really depends how busy we are there, but usually it takes about a week for us to review and then provide a quote to you. And then the packaging, that includes preparing a bilingual label text for you, to proof label compliance. That's included in our scope of work along with translation. It could take a couple of weeks because it's going back and forth with you as the brand owner, and we want to make sure that you're aware of all those changes that have to be done. And then there's of course onboarding with us, us or whoever else you choose to use as an importer, and that could take several weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, and that's to review your supplier, the HACCP plan, food safety plan, make sure all that's aligned, and then basically approving your site ready for importation. And then the logistics and border piece, that time can really depend. Obviously, you're shipping it, by sea. That could take several weeks before it hits the Canadian shores. And then the clearance by the customs agent, the customs broker that's clearing all that for you before it hits a retailer or a warehouse in Canada. So that time will vary. So these are the common pitfalls and things that can go wrong. Number 1, label non-compliance, missing French or incorrect nutrition facts table. There may be documentation gaps. That's where the importer comes into play, where there's missing certificates of analysis or conflicting specs or labels. Maybe there's changes that happen late before you go, maybe you had the right label initially and then there was a quick swap, and then there was something when the importer's checking going, oh, well, that ingredient's not on your label. Can you confirm what happened here? And then if it's something that's, there was a change there and the label's not right, you got to either over sticker and do that in Canada because maybe it's arrived in Canada, or scrap the whole product. That can be really expensive. So make sure you really adhere to that really upstream as much as you can. And then there may be some misalignments that can go wrong too, where the importer and exporter are not aligned in terms of responsibilities. The importer is typically not responsible for the testing at all, right? And so that testing is really almost always done by the exporter, unless there's an arrangement made. You as the brand owner or the manufacturer, however the arrangement is, the testing's got to be done, and the importer is going to look for that testing results, not actually testing it again in Canada. So make sure you're fully aligned with those roles and responsibilities for both parties, and so that there's no surprises. So what to take away from today? Number one, the front of packaging is a major new requirement, and it's basically, you really need to assess your formulation and packaging impact really as early as possible. Labeling and documentation are the number one driver of success or failure. It will make or break you in terms of getting that first shipment at the Canadian border. So make sure those things are really adhered to tightly. Import compliance is shared, right? So both the exporter and importer have these responsibilities, like I alluded to, testing, C of A's, the compliant label, the manufacturer has a HACCP plan, that importer carries that responsibility in terms of verifying that, but that manufacturer has to have that food safety plan. Treat Canadian labeling as a new label, right? It's not an adoption or an adaptation of your EU label. Early planning prevents costly delays, reprints, shipping, holds, or shipment destruction too. So plan, and just constantly communicating with your importer, your consultant, so that there are no surprises, and of course your customs agent as well at the border. And so that's the presentation. There's a QR code here for those of you on screen. You can screen that, you can scan that. That'll take you to our website, and here's your opportunity to ask questions.
Thank you, Andrew, for your presentation. It was very interesting and very informative. At the moment, I don't see questions in the chat, but I have two questions which arose during your presentation. First, you were talking about the front of packaging labeling, and you talked about the requirements, and I noticed that there was one comment. You have to do it except for small packages. Is there any are there any rules when a package is considered a small package, or who decides this?
Yes, correct. So Health Canada does have guidelines in that. It's all laid out in their guidance document of what that threshold is. So like sachets, those typically fall under that. Yeah, so there are full rules as to what that threshold is. It's not arbitrary by any means. So there are dimensions, and if you fall under those dimensions, then you are exempt from that, because you can imagine a really small packaging, and then you have a really small front of package icon. It won't even be readable. So it kind of defeats the purpose.
Then, as it was mentioned, so bilingual labeling is mandatory. Even if it's not sold in Quebec, you have to do this. And you also mentioned it must be the same size, English
That is correct.
and French. I don't know, do you still have access to your slides? Because if you go back to page number 30, you have here the labeling, and you have blue top brands. Then you have honey chipotle, miel chipotle, then you have creamy hot sauce, and you have sauce crémeuse piquante. And sauce crémeuse piquante is clearly smaller than the English. So my question is it allowed because it's a kind of trademark, or should it be the same size? So
Yeah.
what is your opinion?
Yep. So if it's trademarked, and if it's trademarked only in English, then that's where it's fine to just have that trademark English brand name. However, everything else is supposed to be in that same font size. Now, yeah, this example, I mean, you can see it's a little smaller, and this label here is probably pre-bill 96, but yeah, like I mean, you have to like. Creamy hot sauce is not trademarked here. It would have to be the same font size
Okay,
in French. The word above that is both English and French
it's the
is
same size, yeah.
in the same size. Yeah. One thing I should mention too is that Bill 96, and I just learned this from our French translator, because we're working on a garbage bag, for example, that's a biodegradable garbage bag, and they printed on their garbage bags in English only, and they're trying to make a decision, right? And so basically they asked us, oh, can this, like, do we have to change this now? The translator told me, look, there is actually a transition period until 2027, January 1st, 2027. If you have that off, they won't, like the enforcement won't be as stringent. That's not to say that you may still get a trade complaint and it may make your life difficult. But if you are a new brand, you should definitely be adhering to the new regulations. You shouldn't be thinking about trying to buy time here by using old packaging. And if, I mean, an EU brand is clearly going to have like a lot of different things that are not going to comply besides the language, right? So if it's an existing brand here, there is a little bit of that leeway, but just given the nature of how serious Quebec takes their language, um, I would adhere to it as much as early as possible. Like, don't bank on that 2027. The other challenge that you have is 2027. Okay, that's what, 8 months away. Like when you're selling products on store shelves, and say you have a shelf life of 2 years, right, on your product, like your product may be sitting there, it doesn't clear through by January 1st, and now it's non-compliant come January 1st next year, like when the enforcement starts, when the real enforcement. And now what are you going to do? Like, how are you going to find that? Somebody trade complains, OQLF comes after you, and they're going to say, oh, I don't care when you started selling it. I just care what's being sold on the market on this date, January 1st onwards, where Bill 96 is being fully enforced. So there's a lot of those kind of things that are out of your control, that you really have to think about.
But if you come back, okay, so blue top brand would be the trademark, which must be changed, because otherwise it must be blue top.
Yeah, correct.
But what is below? So according to the exact definition of the law, creamy hot sauce and sauce crémeuse piquante should have the same size of the font, which
That's
at the moment
correct.
don't have. Okay.
Yep. They have to be like, I mean, it's probably that's maybe like a, I don't know, maybe like one is like a 18 pitch and the other one is like 16 or 17. It's very
Whatever,
close.
yeah.
And probably in this kind of circumstance, it really depends on the officer, right? If it's a really strict officer, they could really make it really difficult. But if it's so close, they may say, okay, look, you can sell through, but we're going to monitor you and make sure that your next label is the same font size. Often it becomes more glaring when you see it like, okay, it's 11 pitch and then it's 18 pitch and you see the really big difference there. That's where brands really get into trouble.
Okay.
So, I mean, 90% of this label, or 98% is English and French, both the same size. on both sides, like you'll see on the nutrition facts. And you can see that the table here, nutrition facts tables can be two formats. They can be tabular or they can be linear. And that depends, that's driven by the size of the packaging, right? Often in those smaller packaging, you will see more linear nutrition facts tables versus like a tabular is going to be like a jar or a bottle where there's enough room to have that table there and to fit both languages as well. So all these that's what makes it complex, is you have to look at the factors of the format and the language that can all fit into that table or format.
Okay. So are there any questions from the Austrian companies following this presentation? I still don't see any comments in the chat version. Any hands are raised? Okay, if not, then I want to thank the audience for their attention. I want to thank you, Andrew, for doing this very informative presentation. Thanks a lot, and also to the Austrian audience. If you have questions afterwards, please reach out to us. We are here to help you with any questions, and Andrew, of course, also is open to assist and support you regarding labeling and import of food and nutrition to the Canadian market. Thanks a lot, and have all a good day. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.